For more than 50 years, you were never supposed to see these photographs. They were buried deep in classified government archives because they showed a side of the Vietnam War that was deliberately hidden from the American public. Now, Vietnam was the most photographed war in history, but what people saw back home was just a fraction of the truth. It's estimated that a staggering 75% of the pictures taken by the military's own photographers were never shown to the press. For decades, the real face of the war, covert missions, shocking events, and a side of the conflict the government did not want you to see, was hidden away. Today, we're opening those vaults. We're pulling back the curtain on the declassified photos that reveal the secret wars, the hidden players, and the unsung heroes who were systematically erased from the official story. This is the history that was suppressed. Let's get into it. The Secret Warriors of MACVSOG. First up, we're going deep into the shadows with a unit whose very existence was denied by the US government for the entire war. They were called the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group, or MACVSOG. That bland, boring name was the perfect cover for one of the most elite and deadliest special operations units in American history. Created in 1964, SOG was an all-volunteer force, a real who's who of special ops. Army Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Marine Force Recon, and Air Force Commandos, all working closely with the CIA. Their job, to take the fight beyond the borders of South Vietnam and into places the American public was told US troops weren't operating. The supposedly neutral territories of Laos, Cambodia, and even North Vietnam itself. Their main target was the Ho Chi Minh Trail, that sprawling network of paths and tunnels that was the lifeblood for the North Vietnamese army. The photos that have since come out from SOG veterans are just breathtaking, mainly because they were never supposed to be taken at all. Officially, operators couldn't carry cameras, but many of them did, and because of their defiance, we have a visual record of this secret war. In 1972, when the unit was shut down, the military ordered all known photos of SOG to be burned to keep their operations a secret forever. But veterans had already brought their own copies home, hiding them for decades. What these pictures show is a war fought by ghosts. You see American commandos with no identification, no names, no rank, no flags, and so if they were killed or captured, the government could deny they ever existed. You see them prepping for halo jumps, high altitude, low opening, a terrifying way to parachute deep behind enemy lines without being seen. One wild photo shows SOG members linking up under a Huey helicopter high above their training camp. Other images show the legendary Hatchet Force operations, which were company-sized units of American and local soldiers sent on some of the most dangerous missions of the war. There are photos of small, six-man recon teams who would sneak through the jungles of Laos for weeks, dodging tens of thousands of enemy troops. These men faced unbelievable casualty rates. It's often said the rate was effectively over 100%, meaning nearly every volunteer was either wounded, often multiple times, or killed. These photographs aren't just historical documents. They're the only real proof of a war that, for years, officially never even happened. They show a level of guts and sacrifice that was deliberately hidden, all for the sake of political secrecy. The unseen enemy, photos from the other side. For most of the war, the American public's image of the enemy, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, was shaped by military press briefings. They were usually shown as a faceless, shadowy force, but they had their own photographers, soldiers ordered to document their side of the 30-year fight against both the French and the Americans. For decades, their work was almost totally unknown in the West. The photos that have since been published from these North Vietnamese combat photographers change how we see the war. These aren't the kind of propaganda posters you might imagine. They're raw, intimate, and deeply human. They show a society completely dedicated to what they saw as a war for their nation's survival. And they show a level of grit and sacrifice that most Americans never got to see. The conditions these photographers worked under were just insane. While Western journalists had the latest 35mm cameras and all the film they needed, their North Vietnamese counterparts were often using ancient cameras, some from before World War II. Film was so precious that one photographer said he only took 70 pictures during the entire war. They developed their film at night in underground tunnels, using homemade chemicals in tea saucers, all while B-52s dropped bombs and shook the ground above them. And unlike Western journalists who had some choice in their assignments, the North Vietnamese photographers were soldiers first. They were ordered right into the thick of the fighting, carrying a rifle in one hand and a camera in the other. One photographer, Nguyen Din U, remembered standing right behind an anti-aircraft gun crew, snapping pictures as American planes flew straight at them. The gunners didn't flinch, and neither did he. The pictures they took are powerful. There's a hauntingly beautiful photo of a female guerrilla in the Mekong Delta, paddling her boat through a mangrove forest that Agent Orange had turned into a skeleton of itself. Another incredible shot captures a direct firefight, showing the close-quarters reality of the fighting. We see young recruits getting physicals, masked activists meeting in jungle clearings, and guerrillas guarding posts protected by sharpened, punji stakes. These images didn't make it to the West because of war and politics. They showed a determined, resourceful, and human enemy, and that would have made the simple story Americans were being told a lot more complicated. The hidden hand of the Soviets. One of the most sensitive and therefore most suppressed parts of the Vietnam War was the direct involvement of the world's other superpower, the Soviet Union. Everyone knew the USSR was backing North Vietnam, but just how hands-on that support was remained a closely guarded secret. For Cold War reasons, neither Washington nor Moscow wanted the world to know just how close their troops were to fighting each other. Declassified photos, many from CIA archives, now show a much clearer picture of a deep military partnership. One stunning photo, declassified by the CIA, shows a North Vietnamese pilot in his cockpit getting direct instructions from a Soviet Air Force advisor. This wasn't just a matter of shipping weapons. This was hands-on training from Soviet personnel inside North Vietnam. If that had been widely known at the time, it would have been a political firestorm, proving that Vietnam was a direct proxy war between two nuclear powers. Throughout the war, Moscow gave Hanoi a ton of military hardware, advanced missile systems, hundreds of airplanes, helicopters, thousands of anti-aircraft guns, and 2,000 tanks. But it wasn't just gear. The Soviet Union stationed up to 3,000 of its own troops in Vietnam during the conflict. These weren't frontline infantry, but military specialists, missile crews, pilots, and intelligence officers. Photos taken by Soviets, which only came out in Russia decades later, show their officers training Vietnamese soldiers on the very anti-aircraft missile systems that shot down hundreds of American planes. In fact, Soviet crews were directly involved in the fighting, firing missiles at US jets. Official numbers are low, but it's confirmed that more than a dozen Soviet soldiers were killed in action. Soviet spy ships in the South China Sea also played a key, hidden role. They would track B-52 bombers flying from bases in Guam and give North Vietnam early warnings about air raids. The KGB also helped North Vietnam set up its own spy agency, which got very good at tracking and capturing commando teams sent to the north. This was all suppressed because it revealed the true stakes of the war. If the American public found out that their pilots were being shot down by Soviet soldiers using Soviet missiles, the massive increase in tension could have pushed the Cold War into a hot one. These photos were kept secret because they showed the Vietnam War was dangerously close to becoming World War III. We're about to get into some even more personal and shocking stories these photos reveal. But first, if you're finding this hidden history as fascinating as I am, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We're all about uncovering the stories that have been left in the dark. And let me know in the comments which of these secrets has shocked you the most so far. Alright, let's keep going. The candid camera of the US Army. While civilian photojournalists captured the iconic prize-winning photos that helped sway public opinion, there was a much larger group of photographers whose work was almost entirely hidden from view, the US military's own cameramen. It's thought that less than 25% of their photos were ever released, and the photographers almost never got credit. These pictures weren't for the public, they were for internal records. And because of that, they often show a more candid and unvarnished look at a soldier's life. Military photographers have said that, contrary to what you might think, they were rarely told to frame things to glorify the military. Their orders were often simple: Go find some action. This meant they could document the war as they saw it, the violence, the boredom, and the surprising moments of humanity. The result is a huge declassified archive that isn't propaganda or pure gore, but a frank look at military life. These photos show the daily grind of the war, soldiers meticulously cleaning their rifles, exhausted troops on patrol, and the long, agonizing periods of waiting between brutal moments of combat. They also give a peek into military operations that journalists couldn't access, like US Army units being transported by huge fleets of Huey and Chinook helicopters. But mixed in with these routine shots are pictures of incredible heroism that never made the news. One of the most powerful examples comes from a series of photos taken in January 1966 by the famous AP photographer Henri Huet, who was embedded with a military unit. The photos show a 20-year-old Army medic named Thomas Cole. During a firefight, Cole was wounded in the head. Nearly blind with a huge bandage over his eyes, he refused to be evacuated. Hewitt's photos show Cole with just one eye peeking out from his dressing, still treating a wounded sergeant. An AP correspondent there wrote, "Cole kept going, answering the call of a wounded man here, a dying man there." For every photo like Hewitt's that made it onto the cover of Life magazine, thousands more remain in the National Archives. They show medics under fire and soldiers comforting their buddies, quiet moments of bravery that the mainstream press missed. These photos were suppressed simply because they were internal records, not news. But today they offer a vital look at the war as it was actually lived, a mix of boredom, terror, and profound courage. The secret war of psychological operations beyond the battlefield, another war was being fought for hearts and minds, waged in the shadows with propaganda and deception. These were psychological operations, or PSYOPs, and many were run by MACV-SOG. These weren't just about dropping leaflets. They were bizarre and elaborate schemes designed to mess with the enemy. One of the biggest was Operation 34A, a top-secret program of covert actions against North Vietnam. It involved sending in spies and saboteurs, launching commando raids on the coast, and all sorts of psychological tricks. Photos from 34A are rare, but they show South Vietnamese commandos trained by US Special Forces and the sleek patrol boats they used for raids. These missions were meant to pressure Hanoi into stopping its support for the Viet Cong. Officially, the US denied everything. They were supposedly all South Vietnamese operations. But the truth is they were completely controlled and planned by the US. The secrecy was so tight that in August 1964, it accidentally collided with another US operation. A US destroyer, the USS Maddox, was on a spy mission in the Gulf of Tonkin. At the same time, 34A commandos were raiding nearby islands. When North Vietnamese patrol boats responded to the raids, they ran into the Maddox, leading to the infamous Gulf of Tonkin incident, which President Johnson used to massively escalate the war. The photos and documents prove the unprovoked attack was anything but. Even stranger was a PSYOPS program called the Sacred Sword of the Patriots League. This was a completely fake North Vietnamese resistance movement, created and run by SOG. The goal was to create the illusion of a popular anti-communist uprising inside North Vietnam. SOG even created a fake radio station and would airdrop gift kits with radios pre-tuned to their bogus station. The photos from this are surreal. SOG personnel with stacks of counterfeit North Vietnamese money and propaganda designed to make the fake league look real. They even turned captured North Vietnamese soldiers into agents for this phantom resistance and sent them back north. It was a giant puppet show. These operations were suppressed for obvious reasons. They were the very definition of a secret war fought with smoke and mirrors, sounding more like a spy novel than a military campaign. So what do all these declassified photos really tell us? It's more than just filling in a few gaps in a history book. They challenge the entire story we were told about the Vietnam War. They show a conflict that was far more complex, secret, and global than most people ever knew. We've seen the ghosts of SOG who fought a brutal, undeclared war. We've looked through the eyes of North Vietnamese photographers who documented their side with stunning humanity. We've uncovered the hidden hand of the Soviet Union, whose direct involvement nearly tipped the world into a nuclear conflict. And we've seen the unvarnished truth captured by the military's own photographers, the quiet heroism that rarely made headlines. For decades, this visual history was locked away, suppressed to protect political narratives and national secrets. What the government decided to hide shaped the memory of an entire generation. These photos are a powerful reminder that the first draft of history is often incomplete, and sometimes it's deliberately wrong. The truth, as these images show, is always more complicated. Which of these suppressed truths do you think would have had the biggest impact if it had come out during the war? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.